Being alone is not a curse. It is not a punishment. It is a season of power, a season of discovery, a season of preparation. The greatest tragedy in life is not being alone. It is being surrounded by people, yet still lost. Everything in creation begins in a state of aloneness. Before there was life, before there was man, there was God. Alone. And yet he lacked nothing. When God created Adam, he placed him alone in the garden before giving him Eve. Why? Because purpose is found in solitude. If you cannot handle being alone, you are not ready for what is next. Aloneness is the incubator of greatness. The eagle does not learn to fly in a crowd. It does not train with pigeons. It rises to the sky alone because the heights of destiny are not reached in the company of the ordinary. Moses met God alone in the wilderness before leading a nation. Jesus went into the desert alone before stepping into his assignment. Paul spent years in isolation before his name shook the world. What does that tell you? Destiny requires separation. Being alone is not a weakness, it is a process. It is in the place of aloneness that greatness is born. Everything that God calls to greatness, he first separates. When he wanted to build a nation, he called Abraham away from his family, his culture, and everything familiar. When he wanted to prepare Joseph for leadership, he allowed him to be thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, and imprisoned alone. Why? Because aloneness is the incubator of greatness. Could it be that what you are calling rejection is actually preparation? Could it be that what feels like isolation is actually elevation in disguise? Sometimes God has to pull you away from the noise so you can hear his voice. He has to separate you from the crowd so you can develop the strength to stand on your own. Jesus, the greatest leader to ever walk the earth, was often alone. Before his ministry began, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Alone. No disciples, no miracles, no audience, just him and God. Why? Because true power is developed in private before it is displayed in public. If Jesus had to be alone to receive clarity and power, why do we fear being alone? Many people run from solitude because they fear what they will find. They drown their lives in distractions, social media, relationships, and entertainment because silence forces them to face themselves. But here's the truth. If you cannot sit with yourself, how can you expect others to? If you do not know your own thoughts, how can you lead others? Leaders are not born in crowds, they are forged in moments of solitude. Every invention that changed the world was birthed in isolation. The Wright brothers were not in a crowd when they developed the first airplane. They were alone working in their workshop. Thomas Edison did not create the light bulb in a stadium full of people. He was locked away, failing thousands of times until he found success. Isolation is where ideas are refined, where vision becomes clear, where purpose is discovered. Consider David, the shepherd boy. He was alone in the field long before he became a king. It was in solitude that he learned to kill the lion and the bear. It was in isolation that he developed the skills that would one day defeat Goliath. If David had never been alone, he would not have been prepared for the throne. So the question is, what are you doing with your aloneness? Are you wasting it, complaining about who left you, about who doesn't call you anymore? Or are you using it to build yourself, to develop your gifts, to strengthen your mind and spirit? Some of the greatest seasons of growth happen when nobody is watching. If you cannot handle being alone, you are not ready for greatness, because the higher you go, the lonelier it gets. Leaders do not rise in the midst of the crowd, they rise above it. The greatest men and women in history were those who embraced their seasons of solitude and allowed them to shape their character. So if you find yourself alone right now, do not despise it. Do not rush to fill the silence. Let it refine you. Because when the season shifts and the doors open, you will not just be another voice. You will be a voice of power, of wisdom, of purpose. And the world will listen Crowds do not create purpose. If they did, then everyone surrounded by people would know exactly who they are and where they are going. But the truth is, some of the most lost people in the world are those who are constantly surrounded by others. Purpose is not found in noise. It is not found in applause. It is found in solitude. When God formed man, he did not create Adam in the middle of a city, in the midst of a crowd. He formed him in solitude. He breathed life into him in a quiet moment, away from the distractions of others. And before giving him Eve, before surrounding him with responsibility, God gave him an assignment. He gave him purpose. Because until a man understands his reason for existence, he is not ready for anything else. Some people are afraid of being alone because they have never taken the time to discover who they are. They look for purpose in relationships, in friendships, in the approval of others. But purpose is not given by men. It is revealed by God. And God speaks in the stillness. How can you hear him if you are constantly filling your life with noise? Jesus did not discover his purpose in the synagogue. He did not receive his assignment in the middle of a crowd. He received it in the quiet places. At the age of 12, he was found alone in the temple, asking deep questions, seeking knowledge. And before stepping into his ministry, he spent 40 days in the wilderness, alone, not to be entertained, not to be distracted, but to gain clarity. Many people want to know their purpose, but they are unwilling to separate themselves from the things keeping them blind. They want direction, but they refuse to step away from the crowd long enough to hear God's instruction. How can you know your purpose if you are too busy comparing yourself to others? How can you receive vision if your mind is filled with the opinions of people who do not know where they are going? In nature, the greatest trees do not grow in the middle of a forest. The tallest, strongest trees are the ones that stand alone, where their roots have to go deeper, where they are forced to withstand the elements without leaning on others. The same is true for you. If you want to grow, if you want to discover who you truly are, you must be willing to embrace seasons of solitude. Moses did not find his assignment in Egypt in the midst of the palace. He found it in the wilderness. It was in solitude that he encountered the burning bush. It was in solitude that he received his purpose. Had he never been alone, he would have never led a nation. The greatest callings are often birthed in moments of isolation. The reason why so many people struggle with their purpose is that they are seeking it in places it cannot be found. Purpose is not in popularity. It is not in fame or recognition. It is in knowing who you are when no one is watching. If your identity is built on the approval of others, you will always be at the mercy of their opinions. But if your identity is built in the quiet place, in the moments when it is just you and God, then nothing and no one can shake you. The world teaches you to stay connected, to always be surrounded by people, to never be alone. But what if the very thing you are avoiding is the key to unlocking your destiny? What if the reason you have not yet found clarity is that you have not yet embraced silence? Look at David. Before he ever became a king, he was alone in the fields, tending sheep. No audience, no validation, just him and God. But it was in that solitude that he developed the skills, the faith, and the confidence that would one day make him a leader. Had he never embraced his alone time, he would have never been ready for the throne. Do not despise solitude. Do not fear seasons when no one seems to notice you. It is in those moments that God is shaping you, preparing you, and revealing who you truly are. Because once you know your purpose, once you have received your assignment in the quiet place, you will never again need the validation of the crowd. You will walk with confidence, with clarity, with authority, because you will finally know why you are here. Separation is not rejection. It is not punishment. It is preparation. When God is about to elevate you, he first separates you. Because not everyone can go where you are going. Not everyone is meant to walk with you to the next level. And if you are too attached to the familiar, you will never step into the extraordinary. Look at every great man and woman in Scripture, and you will see a pattern. Before God used them, he set them apart. Abraham was told to leave his father's house, to walk away from his homeland, to separate from everything he had ever known. Why? Because where God was taking him required him to let go of what was behind him. You cannot step into destiny while holding on to history. You cannot embrace the future while clinging to the past. Joseph had to be separated from his family before he could become a ruler. His brothers betrayed him. He was thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, and imprisoned. But what they meant for evil, God meant for good. Because had Joseph stayed in his father's house, he would have never reached Pharaoh's palace. Sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually alignment. Sometimes what looks like isolation is actually elevation in disguise. An eagle does not soar with a flock, it flies alone. It rises above the storm while other birds seek shelter. It does not fear separation because it understands that the heights of greatness are not reached in the company of the ordinary. Could it be that the reason you feel alone is because you were never meant to stay grounded? Could it be that the very thing you are fighting, your season of separation, is the thing that is trying to push you higher? Jesus himself had to separate from the crowd to fulfill his purpose. He often withdrew to quiet places, away from distractions, away from voices that could cloud his mission. And when it came time for his greatest assignment, the cross, even his closest disciples could not go with him. He was betrayed, he was denied, he was left alone. But in that moment of greatest isolation, he accomplished the greatest victory. Because some things can only be fulfilled in solitude. They believe that you must be buried alone in the ground before you can grow. You must be willing to endure seasons of separation before you can step into your calling. Have you ever seen a rocket launch? When a rocket takes off, it has boosters attached to it. These boosters help it rise, but at a certain altitude, they must detach. If they do not fall away, the rocket will not reach its destination. Some people are like boosters in your life. They were there to help you for a season, but they cannot go where God is taking you. If you try to hold on to them, they will only weigh you down. Moses had to separate from Egypt before he could lead Israel. Paul had to be separated from his former life before he could become an apostle. Even David had to run from Saul before he could take the throne. Every transition to greatness requires separation. Because what is ahead of you is greater than what is behind you. Do not resist what God is doing. If he is removing certain people from your life, let them go. If he is shifting you away from familiar places, trust him. What feels like loss is often gain in disguise. What seems like loneliness is actually preparation for leadership. Because the higher you go, the fewer people will be able to go with you. So embrace the separation. Do not fight the process, because when the season of elevation comes, you will look back and realize that everything you thought you lost was nothing compared to what God was preparing for you. And when you finally step into your destiny, you will understand that separation was never about rejection. It was about positioning you for greatness. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers. The greatest revelations, the deepest insights, and the clearest visions do not come in the noise of life. They come in the quiet. It is in the silence that purpose is revealed. It is in the stillness that direction is given. The reason so many people feel lost, confused, and uncertain about their destiny is not because God is not speaking. It is because they are too distracted to hear. Throughout Scripture, we see that God speaks in quiet places. When Elijah was hiding in the cave, desperate for an answer, God did not speak in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He spoke in a still, small voice. Why? Because God does not compete with the noise of your life. He does not shout over distractions. He waits for you to be still. If you want to receive divine direction, you must learn to embrace silence. Many people are afraid of silence because it forces them to confront themselves. They keep the TV on, the music playing, and their schedules full because they do not want to sit alone with their thoughts. But if you cannot handle silence, you cannot handle vision. If you cannot be still long enough to hear God, how can you expect to fulfill His purpose for your life? Jesus understood this. Though He was surrounded by crowds, constantly teaching, healing, and leading, He always made time to withdraw. The Bible says He would rise early in the morning and go to a solitary place to pray. He did not seek clarity in the opinions of men. He sought it in the presence of God. And because of that, He always walked with confidence, always knew what to do next, and never allowed the voices of others to distract Him from His mission. The world today is noisier than ever. Social media, television, constant notifications, all these things compete for your attention. But have you ever noticed that the people who make the greatest impact are not the ones who are always talking? They are the ones who take time to think, to reflect, to strategize. Leaders do not just react. They move with intention, and that intention is developed in quiet moments. In nature, the lion is known as the king of the jungle. But have you ever observed how a lion moves? It is never in a hurry. It does not make unnecessary noise. It spends time watching, listening, calculating its next move. And when it does act, it does so with precision. In the same way, if you want to be effective in life, you must learn to be still, to listen, to gain clarity before you move. Moses spent years in the wilderness before leading Israel. Paul spent time in isolation after his encounter with Christ before stepping into his apostolic calling. Even David, before becoming king, spent time alone as a shepherd, where he learned to listen, to worship, to receive wisdom. The quiet seasons of life are not wasted seasons. They are the seasons where vision is sharpened. The problem with many people today is that they mistake activity for progress. They believe that just because they are busy, they are being productive. But being busy does not mean you are effective. You can be moving but going nowhere. You can be talking but saying nothing. True progress begins when you pause, reflect, and receive clear direction. Have you ever noticed that the most successful people take time to think? They schedule quiet moments into their lives because they understand that wisdom is birthed in stillness. Kings, presidents, CEOs, they do not make major decisions in the midst of chaos. They step away, they think, they gain clarity. Why? Because decisions made in the absence of vision lead to disaster. So, if you feel lost, if you feel uncertain about your next step, ask yourself, have you taken the time to be still? Have you stepped away from the distractions long enough to hear what God is saying? Sometimes the answer you are looking for is not in another conversation, another meeting, or another opinion. It is in the silence you have been avoiding. Do not fear stillness. Do not run from quiet moments. They are the very places where God prepares you for what is next. Because when you finally embrace the silence, you will discover that the vision you have been searching for has been waiting for you all along. Aloneness is not a weakness, it is a sign of strength. It is the place where self-mastery is developed, where confidence is built, and where identity is solidified. There is a difference between aloneness and loneliness. Loneliness is a cry for attention, a need for external validation, a fear of being by oneself. But aloneness is empowerment. It is the ability to stand without needing approval, to function without seeking constant affirmation, to know who you are without relying on others to define you. One of the greatest tragedies in life is when a person does not know who they are outside of people. If your sense of worth is based on who is around you, what happens when they leave? If your identity is shaped by the opinions of others, what happens when those opinions change? True strength is not found in how many people support you. It is found in how well you stand when no one does. Jesus demonstrated this principle. Though he had 12 disciples, he did not depend on them to define his identity. He was secure in his purpose before they ever followed him. That is why, when they abandoned him at the cross, he did not lose himself. He remained focused. He remained in control because his sense of worth was not rooted in their presence. It was rooted in his assignment. Many people struggle with being alone because they do not truly know themselves. They are uncomfortable in silence. They seek distractions, fill their time with unnecessary relationships, and avoid solitude at all costs. But here is the truth. If you cannot enjoy your own company, why should anyone else? If you do not know your own mind, how can you lead others? In nature, the lion is called the king of the jungle. But a lion does not travel in large packs like other animals. It is comfortable being alone. It moves with confidence, unshaken by the presence or absence of others. It does not seek validation. It knows who it is. And because of that, everything around it recognizes its authority. Have you ever noticed that people who are truly powerful do not chase attention? They do not beg for approval. They do not fear solitude. Why? Because their strength comes from within. They have mastered themselves. They are not driven by the crowd. They do not need constant reassurance. They have learned to be secure in their own identity. Moses was alone in the wilderness before leading Israel. David was alone in the fields before becoming king. Paul was alone in isolation before stepping into his calling. Every great leader in history has had to go through a season of self-mastery. Because leadership is not about being surrounded by people, it is about being strong enough to stand alone when necessary. The world teaches people to depend on relationships for validation. Society promotes the idea that you must always be connected, always in the company of others, always seeking approval. But what if the greatest version of yourself is waiting to be discovered in solitude? What if the wisdom, clarity, and confidence you need will only come when you embrace aloneness? Think about a tree. A tree does not grow strong because it is surrounded by other trees. It grows strong because its roots go deep. It does not depend on what is around it. It depends on what is within it. The deeper the roots, the stronger the tree. In the same way, your strength does not come from who is around you. It comes from how deeply you are rooted in yourself and in God. Many people fear losing relationships, but what if losing the wrong relationships is the key to finding yourself? What if the very people you are holding on to are the ones keeping you from becoming who you are meant to be? There are some things in life you can only learn when you are alone. There are some strengths you will never develop until you stand on your own. Do not confuse aloneness with loneliness. One is a weakness, the other is power. One is dependency, the other is mastery. When you embrace aloneness, you will no longer be shaken by who comes and who goes. You will no longer live for approval. You will no longer be defined by others, because the person who has mastered being alone is the person who is truly unstoppable. Greatness is never birthed in comfort. It is never found in the crowd. It is forged in the fire of solitude, in the moments where you must walk alone, in the seasons where you are misunderstood, doubted, and even rejected. But those who endure such seasons, those who embrace the process, become unshakable, because true power is developed in isolation. Look at the life of Jesus. He did not seek public approval before stepping into his assignment. He did not wait for validation before walking in his purpose. He spent years in obscurity, preparing, growing, strengthening his spirit. And even when he began his ministry, he often withdrew from the crowds. He understood that power does not come from the noise of men, but from the presence of God. Some people fear being alone because they equate solitude with insignificance. They believe that if no one sees them, they have no value. But value is not determined by visibility. Diamonds are formed in the darkness, beneath the earth, under pressure. Gold is refined in fire, away from public view. The most powerful things are often developed in secret. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, locked in a prison, all before he ever reached the palace. But it was in those lonely places that he was being prepared. Had he not endured those seasons, he would have never had the wisdom, the strength, or the character to lead a nation. Could it be that the very thing you are running from, your season of solitude, is the very thing God is using to prepare you for greatness? An eagle is not trained in the safety of the nest. It is pushed out. It is forced to fly, because if it never leaves the nest, it will never reach the heights it was created for. Some people are stuck in places of comfort, afraid to step into the unknown, afraid to walk alone. But comfort has never produced world changers. Comfort has never birthed visionaries. Those who make history are those who embrace the unknown, who dare to walk alone when necessary. Moses had to leave Egypt before he could become a deliverer. Paul had to be separated before he could be transformed. Even John the Baptist, a man chosen to prepare the way for Christ, lived in the wilderness before stepping into his calling. There is a pattern throughout Scripture. Before God uses a person greatly, he isolates them deeply. Because solitude is not punishment, it is preparation. Many people resist this process because they seek constant companionship. They believe that being surrounded by people will give them strength. But the strongest individuals are not those who rely on others. They are those who have learned to rely on God. If your confidence comes from people, what happens when they leave? If your stability is based on approval, what happens when the applause stops? A tree does not grow tall because of the trees around it. It grows tall because its roots are deep. It can stand through storms, through droughts, through changing seasons. Not because it depends on other trees, but because it has established itself. The same is true for you. Your strength is not in your surroundings, it is in your foundation. And the foundation of true power is built in solitude. Have you ever noticed that the loudest people are often the weakest? That those who constantly seek attention are often the most insecure? But those who have spent time in solitude, those who have faced themselves, who have fought their battles in private, walk with a different kind of authority. They do not need to prove themselves. They do not need constant reassurance. They move with purpose, with clarity, with confidence. David was a shepherd before he was a king. He was alone in the fields before he ever faced Goliath. And it was in that solitude that he developed his skill, his faith, his boldness. Had he not embraced those quiet years, he would not have been prepared for the throne. Some of you are asking for promotion, but are you prepared? Some of you want to be seen, but are you ready for the weight of responsibility that comes with visibility? Do not despise your season of solitude. Do not resist the process. Because what feels like isolation is actually transformation. What seems like rejection is actually redirect. And when the time comes for you to step into your purpose, you will realize that every moment of solitude was necessary because it made you unshakable. As we come to the end of this journey, let me remind you that the path to greatness is not one walked with ease, but one forged in solitude, in silence, and in moments of aloneness. It is in these times, away from the noise and distractions, that you are shaped, refined, and prepared for what lies ahead. Embrace the process. Do not fear being alone, for it is in your moments of solitude that your greatest strength, clarity, and purpose will emerge. Remember, purpose is not found in the crowd, but in the quiet. Greatness is not achieved through comfort, but through courage and determination. You are not defined by the presence or absence of others, but by the foundation you build in those quiet moments, standing firm in who you are and who you are becoming. As you continue on your journey, I encourage you to walk boldly, knowing that the silence, the solitude, and the seasons of aloneness are not setbacks, but setups for the next chapter of your destiny. Trust the process, trust yourself, and trust that greatness is being developed within you even when no one is watching. Good luck on your journey. May you walk with purpose, embrace your aloneness with strength, and always remember that your best is yet to come. Thank you for taking the time to listen, reflect, and grow. Keep striving and never forget that the greatest victories are often birthed in the quiet.